Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to see such a big crowd here. Slightly disconcerted if it is because you do all hate each other. But hoping that we can get through the session today without too much blood on the floor. I'm Anne Mossop from the Sydney Opera House. I'm one of the curators of the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. And it's a great pleasure always to see people coming into the Opera House when it's sunny outside, let alone in such numbers. A few housekeeping matters before we get started today. Please do make sure that your mobile phones are on silent. Feel free to tweet to hashtag FODI. We've been having a very entertaining conversation on Twitter, and I am assured by the very surprising collection of people who felt it was more important to go to the football yesterday that they were able to keep track of what we were up to quite well. We have a wonderful panel to talk to you today. There will be time for questions and answers towards the end of the session. You'll see that there are microphones on the floor in the house, upstairs and downstairs, and to ask a question you will need to come down to one of those. I just want to mention very briefly before I introduce our panellists, this session came out of a session in the festival last year, titled, starting to sound like we're getting a bit repetitive here, All Women Are Sluts, but where the last question from a young girl on the floor was, which we really didn't unfortunately have time to discuss, was, the only people who ever call me a slut are other girls. And that fell into the conversation, with other girls at school. That fell into the discussion with a lot of force, and we felt that we weren't really able to discuss it. So we're remedying that today, I think. As our moderator today, we have Jenny Brockie, award-winning journalist and host of the fabulous Insight program on SBS. Our panel, Germaine, Greer, legendary feminist, author of books from The Female Eunuch to the essay on rage. Those of you who had the good fortune to see her speak yesterday, she's in absolutely fantastic form. And for those of you who missed it, a reminder that our talks will all be available from our website and on iTunes after the festival. So if you didn't see it, don't miss that one. It was very special. We also have on our panellist Tara Moss, crime writer. Her most recent book is Assassin, but a woman of many parts and the most fantastic and thoughtful blog about all of these issues. Do go and have a look at it. Eva Cox, social commentator, feminist, co-founder of Women's Electoral Lobby, somebody who, like Germaine, is a fearless commentator on a broad range of social issues. And Dannielle Miller, an expert on girls and issues like self-esteem and body image, the author of 2 books, The Butterfly Effect and The Girl with the Butterfly Tattoo, a guide for girls to claiming their power, and somebody who, through her company Enlighten Education, works with tens of thousands of girls throughout Australia. Dannielle and Tara will be signing books after the event in the bookshop, so do come and join us there after the session. And nothing more from me than the happy duty of welcoming our wonderful panellists to the stage. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thanks. I think you're over there. Hello everyone, welcome to this session, very modestly titled All Women Hate Each Other. I'd like to kick off by quoting something that one of the guests at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas said a few years ago. Jesse Bering, in an article that he wrote about women's cruelty to one another, spoke of meeting an endearing 6-year-old girl, and he remarked that if she was anything like the rest of her gender, and I'll put this in quotes here, in just a few years' time she will unfortunately morph into an eye-rolling, gossiping, ostracising, sarcastic, dismissive, cliquish 9th grader, embroiled in the classic cafeteria-style bitchery of adolescent female social politics. He did go on, to be fair to Jesse, to outline some of the research around this, and he also pointed out that he had much in common with this Machiavellian style, and he respected it in its refined form. So, Germaine, I wanted to ask you. You wrote 40 years ago that women have no idea how much men hate them. Do women hate each other?
Well, the business about women not knowing how much men hate them is different from saying that men hate them. Women constantly hang out with men who are very dangerous to them. And the fuss and bother about Jill Maher's dreadful experience and death in Melbourne, they're trying to make it sound as if that's common. It isn't. The streets are not where danger lies for women. Women get killed at home. Just remember that. So that's one thing I think it's really important to say today. So women don't know how much men hate them. They constantly tell themselves that men are mean to them and hit them because they love them. It takes them a long time to figure out the truth behind that. And we could talk for a long time about why men have such complicated feelings about women. It's partly to do with their complicated feelings about their own sexuality and their sexual insecurity and their fear of humiliation and so on. But that's not our subject.
No, it's not.
Now, when it comes to why women are mean to each other, then we have to, apart from the fact it's kind of silly, men are mean to each other too. And we're not sitting around, just watch the football, for example. They can want each other's eyes out. That's pretty mean, and it's all supposed to be sporting. Women are mean to each other because they have been forced to identify with their male family. If you're actually in the mating game, and Jessie does talk about that, about mate rivalry, then you're afraid of other women. You're afraid they'll steal your man. Men have the same fear, but it expresses itself rather differently. Men are afraid of being humiliated. Women are afraid of being abandoned. And that's a real fear, a desperate
So do you see
fear.
sexual rivalry at the heart of the way that women behave towards one another when it's negative?
Just realize that I don't accept it anyway. Because women do like women as well as fear them. And they need them, and they court them, and they get disappointed. And we can all think of situations where we've expected a woman friend to be on deck for us when we needed it. And she's gone off with the boyfriend because the boyfriend deliberately made the claim at that point. Because he is your rival. And he knows what to do, and he knows how to exploit her emotional insecurity. It's very common in oppressed people that they express their negative emotions to people they can hurt. We can't really hurt men to the extent to which we might feel we needed to, because we're so frightened of being abandoned by them. So we hurt someone else who's within range. And that is usually someone who's just like us. So that it comes down to the thing I called in The Female Eunuch, the defect in female narcissism, which is women's lack of confidence about whether they're as they ought to be, whether they please, because how can you know if you please? You've got to ask for reassurance. Do you like me? Do you love me? The endless question. So obviously, when women are feeling, it happens as well with men. For example, when men are unemployed, they beat their wives. What a surprise. They're within, domestic violence goes up in a steep curve whenever we have a rise in unemployment, male unemployment. So we see the same thing in women. Now, there's no point in turning it into a description of female character or female unreliability or something or other. It's the psychopathology of oppression that we're dealing with.
Okay, Dannielle, you work with teenage girls all the time. What do you think about this idea of female social aggression? Because this is one of the things that Jessie talks about. He talks about women employing socially aggressive behaviour towards one another as a real negative.
I see cultural aggression against teenage girls, which his comment really typifies. We demonise teen girls in popular culture. We do talk about them as being eye-rolling, difficult, sullen. We talk about them as being queen bees and wannabes, princess bitch faces. These are all terms that we use collectively to describe teen girls. I have teen girls, I work with teen girls. Of course they can be difficult and challenging, as we all can be, but they can also be incredibly beautiful and nurturing. And I think there's nothing more generous and joyful to watch than teen girls collectively when they're friends. I mean, they're almost like little monkeys grooming each other and stroking each other, and it's really quite beautiful. And in fact, despite the rhetoric about bad girl behaviour, we also know that this stage of the teen girl experience is meant to be one where you form your own adult identity and you do play this compare and despair game that teen girls play. I mean, they've been groomed to play it since they've been this big, this little.
Groomed meaning what, though? I mean, are you
Yeah.
suggesting that the negative behaviour is learned behaviour? Because,
Much
I mean,
of
I
it.
think we can get the all out of this
Yeah.
discussion. Let's get the all women hate each other out of this discussion.
Sure.
And let's just talk about, why is there negative, socially aggressive behaviour
Yeah.
in female groups manifest in the way that it does?
Well, teen girls tell me that there are two main drivers for that. That certainly from small, they've been encouraged to play this compare and despair game. Look at magazines. Who's in, who's out, who's hot, who's not, ranking celebrities. And so they play those games within the playground, within their own peer group. But secondly, apart from just the media, girls see this modelled at home. I mean, girls can't be what they can't see. And so often within their homes, they see relationships that are dysfunctional, they see adults who don't know how to resolve conflict amicably. And in a crowded curriculum, when we have students constantly being drilled for NAPLAN tests, we never actually take the time to teach young people how to resolve conflict, how to manage their friendships more successfully.
Do you think do you see more intense behaviour, though, in girls in terms of the way that they relate to one another around those negative areas? The ostracising, the way social groups operate, the way...
Yes, I do. And I think the ultimate girl sins, if you like, that girls will use to target each other are incredibly revealing about what's going on in teen girls' psyche. If a girl is upset with another girl, she'll target her body. So she'll call her fat. Fat cow, fat dog, fat mole, fat something will be hurled. They'll target her sexuality. She'll be a slut or she'll be a lesbian, often both in the same day. And the ultimate girl crime, interestingly, because we were talking about this earlier, Germaine, the ultimate girl crime is to love yourself. She thinks she's so good. She's up herself. She thinks she's all that. Incredibly revealing.
So why is it the girls doing that, though, in that way, to other girls?
Well, as
Making
Germaine
those
said, I really
judgments?
do think, they are an oppressed group. And so they fight for power within their own oppressed group.
Eva, what do you think?
I think we're really going down a track here which worries me, because it's that sort of thing about, again, looking at girls, stereotyping women, saying these are things that women do and girls do. I mean, we're all human beings and we go the full spectrum, from good and evil. And I think, this way we're stereotyping a particular gender and a particular set of relationships is a very sort of Anglo-Western and various other things in many ways. And it also does ignore the fact that we are actually looking at an incredible variation of the way things do it. I mean, I'm a sociologist, so I tend to come to this from a broader thing. Yes, I agree with Germaine, we're the oppressed group. But I think I'm much more interested in the fact that how that actually interacts. And one of the things is that I think we need to look at why women behave. We can be both incredibly supportive and have lots of women friends, and we do very well with the women's things, and we can be incredibly controlling. And one of the reasons I suspect that the controlling stuff happens is because we do not determine our lives. We don't determine what are the priorities. We don't determine what government does. We don't determine the big politics things. We're pushed inwards into the interpersonal because the other stuff is blokey type stuff. I mean, boys bash the hell out of each other. I mean, I wonder how many people would be here looking at the audience if this was a session and all men hate each other. It's just not something people even bother saying and even bother exploring. And I think we've got to be fairly careful that we're talking about the spectrum of everything there, and we tend to focus on some girls are bitchy, some girls do this, some girls do that, some women do this, some women do that, some women are shaped by their household tasks, some women are shaped by their relationships. An awful lot of us are also shaped by our workplaces, which nobody here has mentioned. And one of the things that appalls me as a sort of 40-year-old veteran of sort of fighting for women's stuff is that we haven't changed workplaces. They're still run very much on macho male lines. The power structures are still macho male. We have more women in top positions, but they actually haven't changed anything. That was one of the big mistakes we made assuming that getting women into top positions would change things. And one of the things I'd like to sort of mention here, which is something that actually only occurred to me when I was trying to prepare this, one of my favourite authors is a woman called Hannah Arendt, who talks about the parvenu, who talks about the person who's always uncomfortable in the area that they're in because they don't really belong there, and they get punished for being too like the people, they get punished for not being alike enough. And I think for a lot of women that there's that real discomfort that we don't determine what the rules are for the wider society. So we have the choice of either becoming part of them and policing other women who push against the system, or objecting and retiring to being an all-female group. And that's that sort of pariah thing. And I think we've just got to be very careful about recognising that it is really important that we don't run the place. We do not have a clear sense of our own power.
So you think that I'm dealing with the topic here, so in a sense I have to keep coming back to the topic, but you're suggesting that it's all external? That any negative behaviour, female on female, is essentially driven by external circumstances?
No, I'm not saying it all is. I mean, none of our behaviour is all external, none of it is all internal, but I'm saying that there's a hell of a lot more of it than is external that we actually acknowledge, which is that lack of powerlessness, lack of a sense. So we turn in on our bodies because it's much harder, much easier to sort of clip your labia than it is to do something about changing the workplace. We can actually... and so in a sense, the terrible focus on the media, I mean, what happens in media images, what happens in that stuff are symptoms of powerlessness, symptoms of us not running the place, symptoms of the criteria that are constantly imposed on women, which means you either play it our way, but not too hard, because if you're too much like the blokes, we'll slag off at you, or you or you can sort of retreat into the feminine sort of areas, which are the interpersonal. And somehow or other, we've not bridged that gap, despite the fact that we've had the women's movement running for a very long time. We still have a power structure that is basically macho.
Tara, what's your take on this topic?
Well, I find the concept of the panel absurd, of course, because there's a dark side in human nature across cultures, across different demographics. And if we're going to look at a specific gender, if we're going to point at a gender, it's incredible to me that we demonize negative social behaviors from women, when the negative social behaviors of men are much more likely to cause physical injury, death. Young men are more likely to suicide successfully, if you want to call it that. They're much more likely to die at their own hands, the hands of each other, than women are. And it seems extraordinary to me that since seemingly the beginning of time, certainly since biblical days, we've demonized any sort of female assertiveness, female aggression, female competitiveness, despite the fact that men are 10 times more likely to murder, they're 28 times more likely to rape, they're 400% more likely to commit an offense that causes injury. And yet we're sitting here talking about teen girls as if there's a problem there.
But we are talking about women. I mean, we're here to talk about women. So I'm just interested in what you think about I take on board what you're saying about men, but we are here to talk about women. I wonder what your take is on the topic.
Well, women don't all hate each other, and I think it's one of those classic sayings that goes hand in hand with the idea that women are their own worst enemies. It's absurd. Women are not their own worst enemies. People who harm women are women's worst enemies. I think it's a distraction, and I think that when we look at even studies that have been done on groups, if you look at all-female groups like, say, all-girls schools, they actually end up getting a better education. They score better in tests as a result of being in an all-girls school. You'd think that if all women hate each other and if these all-female environments were somehow toxic, that would be impossible, wouldn't it? You couldn't get those sorts of results. But I don't think there's any way we can truly quantify this idea that women are somehow inherently more evil and devious. I think it's a stereotype. It goes back to Eve and Pandora opening the box or the urn. We've seen this for a long time. It's one of the great ironies of the foundations of our culture, that it was a male god that birthed the world, and it was a female who brought all the sin into it. When every single woman, well, if we look at the world, we look at stats, it's women who give birth, and it's men who are very largely the ones who commit crimes, violent crimes in particular. So it's one of the great ironies, I think, that we've somehow bought into this concept. I think it's completely absurd.
Okay, we can all go home now. I'm interested in your own personal experiences, though. Going way back to being young, 12, 13, 14-year-old girls right through. I mean, have you felt that you've suffered at the hands of other women in the terms that Jessie is talking about? You know, the way in which social groups are organised, particularly in schools, that kind of thing.
Why do we have to take Jessie as a starting point? I mean, he's a bloke.
Well, he's not the only starting point. I mean,
No,
you only have to look at popular culture. If you look at films, you look at books that are written about this stuff. You do a little tour on Google, Eva, and you'll find any number of blogs and things talking about women's behaviour towards one another, and women decrying it, women saying that they feel oppressed by the way other women treat them.
I think that, but the oppression of other women treating us is one of the things I was trying to get at, is very often the women act as the sort of police, in a sense, for the broader society. So, I mean, one of the things that interests me is why we haven't actually achieved more in the 40 years, and I think part of that is that we very often punish women, other women, because we're the less dominant group, because we don't have control over the society. We act as the sort of, sometimes as the God's police. And this can happen even in feminist circles, I must say, of trying to control women who are too pushy, control women who are seen as too powerful, control women who sort of claim that they're too beautiful. I think that that's a symptom of powerlessness rather than a symptom of femininity. And I think we've got to be really careful we don't confuse the two.
Okay, Germaine, sorry. Your reaction to this? I mean, personal
we got sucked into
experiences.
this. We got sucked into this non-topic by Samantha Brick. We then got embarrassed about being vulnerable to something, to a ploy from a right-wing newspaper that was as obvious as Samantha Brick. Many people were very nasty about Samantha Brick, who clearly thinks she's very beautiful, when in fact she's nice-looking. And what happened? And what happened was that she was attacked by mostly, women and men. I mean, who reads the Twitter sphere? You read it, you get what you deserve. But I think we have to understand something about corporate society. We have to understand something about men. Men work at making groups. They learn a very strict discipline. It usually involves a pecking order. Submission to the right people. Submit to the wrong person and you're a fool. I like to watch men lunching together. And at the bridge room, I had the perfect opportunity. There were 7 men at the table. And I watched to see who got there first. That was important. They positioned themselves, leaving the key space for the silverback, who was as late as he should be. He arrived with his attendants, his step and fetch it, his joker, and the person he is grooming to take over. They were gorillas in the mist. All I had to do was observe the minutiae of their interaction. Who called who by his first name? Who called who sir? Who called who Mr. Whatnot? And they have learnt all this the hard way. And it's not easy. Men traditionally form hierarchies. Those hierarchies are all in the process of negotiation. What happens when a woman is forcibly introduced to that hierarchy, as is going to happen in boardrooms when the latest round of knee-jerk legislation comes into power? Women are going to find themselves in situations that basically they don't understand. And all that's going, they're going to think they'll discuss the issues on their merits. They won't, because the strategy is one of power negotiation between the men. They have done it all in the boom boom room or the men's room or the golf course or wherever. And the women are outside the loop. They exist there to be manipulated by those men. Now, one of the things that I want women to learn is how to build groups, how to give each other a break, how to learn to play, to be silly, to not demand always intimacy. Sometimes intimacy is not what's needed, but women feel betrayed if their best friend has a secret. Their best friend is entitled to lick her wounds in private if that's what she wants to do. She needs some space with people who are not sitting in judgment. And we haven't learnt how to play. And I get into terrible trouble for saying this because it grieves me that women are constantly working, constantly building, constantly looking towards an end result and not just hanging out. It's something that women find hard to do. And we know how men do it, and we sneer at them because they have phatic communication. They say things that are meaningless. What they're saying is, I'm your mate, and you're safe with me. It isn't always true. It's often the opposite.
So is that pursuit of intimacy that women often, that you're talking about with women, do you see that as a negative thing in some cases? Like it's something that can actually lead to very negative...
I think you can say it's an outcome of loneliness. If when you talk nobody listens, and that's what nagging is about, it's saying, I'm unhappy, I hurt, and it's called nagging. It's called being negative. It's called whatever it's called. At a certain point, you just need to be in the atmosphere of acceptance. And we haven't learnt how to do it because it is an artifact. It is artificial, but it's also socially very necessary.
Dannielle, what do you teach girls?
Well, I'm just going to say that the scene you described at lunch, I'm sorry, but I would see that replicated with any group of girls at lunch. Girls are very good at knowing where to sit, who to sit with, who should sit in which position, who plays which role within that dynamic. I think girls are very political creatures, and they shouldn't be apologetic about that. And I think they have those great networking skills and great intimacy skills. I do think culturally we dismiss the way in which they communicate. We dismiss their communication on Facebook and Twitter, and we think that it's all very frivolous. They've always had a desire to communicate. It's just the tools that they're using are quite different.
Well, it's just there was no table of 7 women in the bridge room.
But that's about where, as opposed to about the behaviour.
I was really struck to see that we had heterosexual couples and we had tables of men.
Yeah.
And I thought, surely this has changed by now. And it's partly because it was the bridge room, because of where it is, and so on, because of where it is in the pecking order this year. So we were looking at a particular phenomenon. But I don't admire the corporate structure. I think it's a system in which men are programmed to fail because there can only be one CEO, because the bodies are cast aside, are falling from the windowsills all the way up to the top of the skyscraper. Women have got to change the corporate model. So if you say to me that they're replicating it as young women, I'm stricken. I hope they're not.
I'm not saying they're replicating the corporate dynamic. What I'm saying is that teen girls do naturally know how to network and how to develop.
Yeah, but network is not the same thing.
It's a different sort of network. I mean, I think the point that Germaine's making, and I would also support that, is that women network differently. And I think the point that Germaine was making earlier about the fact that, you demand that people open up emotionally, that they sort of do all of those things there.
That you have a deep and meaningful...
That it has to be a deep and meaningful. You're not so good at the superficial relationships. You're not so good at the collegial relationships in many cases because you start playing the sort of games which are much more emotional. I mean, what happens when, and I think what women are much better at, partly because we have been isolated into that area, is we're much better at playing emotions, our own and other people's. We're not so good at sort of
Positively and negatively.
Positively and negatively. We're not as good at sort of actually just getting on with the tasks and doing the jobs and setting ourselves up even within the sort of power hierarchies. So,
or even just chilling out is
or even
what
just
you're
chilling.
saying,
And
Germaine, in a sense, about the way that the men don't need to have these kind of big...
Girls are brilliant at chilling out.
Yes,
but girls aren't brilliant at anything. Sorry, I mean, I really object to the fact of us saying girls are brilliant. Some girls are klutzes. Some girls can't communicate. Some are going to be as thick as a brick, and some of them have the emotional thing of a rabbit. And so do boys.
Yes.
So I think we've got to get away from generalising about girls, because this is one of the things that traps women, is this sense that all women... I mean, one of the biggest problems that we set up, and I think it's one of the backwashes maybe, is some of the negative stuff, is saying things like, oh, we need women in the boardrooms because they're going to be nicer. I mean, that was a really bad thing to say, because any woman who gets into the boardroom who isn't nicer and doesn't act as mother or sister or carer to every other man in the boardroom is immediately labelled a bitch.
Yeah, but I'm interested in picking up what you were saying, Germaine, about women could learn something just about pulling back a bit, not feeling that they have to pursue intimacy.
But there's a number of things you need to do that. You need leisure time. Most women won't allow themselves that. They have to turn every hour to some sort of benefit. They're working harder outside the workplace than they are in it. They feel enormously involved in what's happening with their children. They also, interestingly enough, in the corporate world, they feel very involved with the people they delegate work to. They think that if that person fails, it's their fault. And they've put that person through a humiliating experience because of their own mistake. I mean, the great freedom for me, for feminists, is going to be freedom from guilt. Everything that goes wrong for a woman is her fault in some sort of way. So she delegates a job to someone who's struggling, so she watches over that person's shoulder. And we get told that she's too hands-on. She doesn't know how to delegate because she can't do what the silverback does, which is take credit for underlings' achievements and escape blame for the underlings' failure. She refuses to accept the absolute tenet that management is the art of taking credit for other people's work. Women don't, if it's true, they don't accept it. Now, what we would hope is that as more and more women enter the corporate structure, they will transform it. But what we have had to see is that it's a sclerotic structure. It can't be transformed. It can only be smashed. And we're nowhere near doing it yet.
Time to destroy the brain.
Let's talk a little bit about the policing of appearance, which is one of the topics that was one of the aspects of this topic that was highlighted in the notes around it. Tara, are women the most pronounced offenders in the policing of the appearance of other women?
I immediately respond with no. The first thing people do is talk about women's magazines and how they focus on the appearance of women. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's also another type of magazine out there called men's magazines. They also do precisely the same thing. Our culture is focused on the appearance of women, and this is as a result of valuing women for their appearance and their fertility and what they can bring to a man and a family unit. When we finally abandon this very narrow avenue for women, when we finally abandon this value system we have for women, we'll see something different. But in the meantime, I think it's absurd to focus on the fact that women police each other on appearance. Of course they do. Men also police women based on their appearance. They talk about their appearances, they focus on their appearances, and we see this represented in pop culture as well, of course. And because we're very exposed to the media and popular entertainment, of course we all are, we're all affected by this, a lot of these ideas are reinforced constantly. You know, the male character, or the main character is male, the female characters are love interests, we focus on their appearances. You know, we see this a lot. We can change this with time, but it hasn't changed yet, and as a result, sure, yes, we do see women's magazines focusing on what people are wearing and how they appear. And we
Well, it's
also
not just
see
women's magazines, it's other women. I mean, you can sit in a room of women and a woman will come into the room and somebody will make a comment about, oh, look at what she's wearing, or she's put on weight, or, Dannielle, you must deal with this with the teenage girls. What are your views about this?
The research clearly does show us that body image is a huge concern for young women in particular, and for young men. And body image angst in young men is increasing. In fact, we know at the moment that up to 20% of anorexics will be males, and that's a big growth, actually, in terms of that particular eating disorder. So young women are feeling enormous pressures around body image, and I think it's that the definition of what we think of as beautiful has become so incredibly narrow. There's very little diversity. And the models that are presented to young girls quite literally take up very little space. And this is distorting for young girls their perception of what is normal. I ask girls in schools, what would you think would be the average dress size of Australian women? Would you think it's a size 8? There'll always be a few girls who think it's an 8. A 10? Quite a few more. 12? Everyone's hands up, they're all looking smug. Of course, the average dress size of Australian women is 16. They're flabbergasted at that. By definition, you are a plus-size model if you're a size 12 or above.
But can I just say,
Tara,
this skewed perspective, I think, comes from just how powerful the media, pop culture, and advertising is in our culture at the moment. And I can't stress this enough, women are still largely seen, but not heard. Most advertisements have beautiful women in them. We like to look at beautiful people. We look at these beautiful women. But when you actually analyze the voices that we hear in terms of the media, where we get our news from, the percentage by which women and men are quoted in regards to real current affairs events, these voices are largely male. In fact, Fourth Estate did a fantastic analysis of the coverage of the election in the States. They did 6 months of coverage. They looked at how many women and men were quoted on various issues. On women's issues, women were less than 20% of the quotes. On abortion, it was 81% of the quotes were from men. Okay? We need to keep this in mind when we make these generalizations about women. We're looking at them in through a very narrow prism. And as a result, of course, we have all this sort of skewed perspective. We're not really seeing women's experiences. We're not seeing the full differences in women's lives, their relationships, their personalities, their body sizes, their shapes, and their goals. We're just not seeing them represented because of that smaller slice of pie.
Germaine, can I just ask?
Have you noticed something important about women? They don't die. The obituaries never feature women. They must all be immortal.
Okay, let's get back. Let's stick with appearance for a moment.
But can I just say
hang on just 1 second, Eva. Let's stick with appearance for a moment, because Germaine, I have to ask you about getting into trouble.
I knew you'd do this.
Have to do it for criticising Julia Gillard, our Prime Minister's jacket, and commenting on the size of her ass. Now, public life is awash with ill-fitting jackets, mostly worn by men. Why did you choose to criticise her jacket?
The real reason for that is that from the time she has been in that position, apart from the mythology about how she got there, as if it was unusual to have a palace revolution in the Labour Party, apart from all that nonsense about knifing Rudd in the back and so forth, she has been groomed for public appearance. Nobody cares what a male politician wears. We couldn't tell you how many suits David Cameron's got, or any of them. They're all sub-fusk. Their ties sometimes cause a bit of a frisson, and that's usually deliberate. But then, the thing about Julia is that you know what she wears. Normally she wears her black top and her black pants. That's her working gear. But she's not allowed to appear that way in public. She has to look brighter and younger and charminger. She's grey-haired, in fact, but it'll take you a while to figure that one out. And the annoying thing about the jackets was we do have tailors in this country. They do know how to cut a jacket. They do know how to cut a toile, so that would actually always fit her.
But would you have made that comment about a man? I mean, you haven't.
Yes.
But you haven't.
I said Ian Paisley looked like an unmade bed. I mean, because he did look like an unmade bed.
But you came in for a lot of criticism from feminists over singling that out. I mean, do you think it was helpful to other women?
I don't have to be helpful. Why do I have to be helpful? I didn't.
What to the rest of you think about that? I mean, would you have said that, Eva?
No, the thing is that I got rung up repeatedly by journos just after that saying, aren't you shocked by what Germaine said? And I kept saying, no, why aren't you shocked? You're a feminist. I mean, the very fact that everybody, including probably a large number of this audience, and the fact that you're answering this question gets obsessed with that particular thing indicates the powerlessness of women. And I really think we should stop talking about it. Because men wear, I mean, the reason we don't criticise what men wear, it's very difficult to distinguish between 50 million blue suits. I mean, they all look the same. But I just think, women are seen as that thing. We focus on them, and we're trying to do it again here. I mean, I just think, somebody said, well, why did Germaine say it? I said, because that's the sort of thing Germaine says. I just really can't understand it, this idea that, as a feminist, you shouldn't say anything about another woman, and to criticise them just illustrates the real powerlessness of both women and the feminists.
I think the reaction was more that it was about appearance rather than being about...
Let me just say this. Having a big ass is not a bad thing. I have said many times, often to sixth formers where it might be important, that women are fat-assed creatures. And if we're talking about men's magazines, they talk about fat-assed women as if there was some kind of plague on the face of the earth. Get used to it. We are fat-assed creatures. And our fat ass will protect us from many of the diseases of aging. That's what makes us live longer than men, is our big ass.
Okay, questions. Let's go to some questions. Who'd like to pick up on some of the issues that have been raised? Now, where are the mics? I'm not even sure where they are.
Always a man. Piss off.
Microphone 1.
Piss off, orange t-shirt.
Okay.
I would just like the panel to comment on the feminisation of education. With over 80% of teachers in primary schools now being women, we don't have a lot of male role models for younger students. And even in secondary schools, there's predominantly female teachers. If all women hate each other, or some women hate each other, that impact on our generations coming through could be significant. I'm just wondering if the panel would like to comment.
Okay, who'd like to pick up on
I
that?
was asked some years ago about how we got more men into the primary schools. I suggested they tip them out of the principal's office. Because
Good point.
Because that's basically where all the blokes are. They get into things like the early childhood area and the primary area and rise immediately to the top, which raises a whole lot of other sorts of issues.
Yeah.
And I just think we've got to recognise that men are not silly enough to go for low-paid, low-cost jobs in areas which are seen as feminine. And if they do, like nurses, there's, something like 80% of directors of nursing are male, and they're 20% of the nursing profession.
But I think the point the questioner wants to ask is about role modelling, about having a mix of role models in schools.
We do of course we need a mix of role models, but it actually means we're going to have to pay the feminised occupations a decent wage so that the men will actually take them
Yes.
Okay, up here, yes.
I've been following with a lot of interest the women's movement for the past 2 years, so quite recently. And something that I'm observing that is in no way just specific to women or feminism, but it's happening a lot, is when the group is discussing ideas, the media, the blogs tend to go into personal attacks and dissecting characters. And I just wanted your opinion on, is that useful and important for the conversation? Is that something, and if it's not, is it something that we can avoid, and how do we avoid, how do we push our communities to raise the bar? So I would love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, Dannielle, do you want to talk
Yeah.
about that, social media and women?
Yes, and as a media commentator, I have had some really horrible attacks, and they always target you on the traditional things. You're either fat, you're a slut or a lesbian, or you must be up yourself. I mean, it's back to that schoolyard politics, and it's very problematic because for some women, of course, it would be very alienating, and it would make you not want to step into the public arena and
So
speak
is that
out.
criticism coming mostly from women?
No, it would be mixed.
It's
And
a
in
mix.
fact, the very vicious attacks I've had have been from men, and very powerful men, I might say. I also think, just in relation to the point about Germaine's comments, I just want to say that we are also hyper aware of anything that a woman does that we think isn't correct, or that perhaps might be a mistake, or that is an example of conflict. Recently on Channel 9, I spoke about the two young stars of the Shire and the fight that they had, the two female stars. That particular YouTube clip of me discussing that attracted 150,000 views within a week. Usually my YouTube clips are lucky to attract 200 views. So it just goes to show there is this incredible... Absolutely.
Yeah, but I would want to say that the argumentum ad hominem has been typical of Australian intellectual life ever since I can remember. They never try to figure out what you said. They always want to tell you why you said it. And this means that debate becomes impossible because you refuse to discuss the issue. This has been a fault at every level of Australian intellectual intercourse. You would hope that as we got to be a bigger, more self-confident country, we'd shake our ears and break out of it. We have proper intellectuals, have proper views. It's not down to whether they had a failed relationship when they were 12.
Can I just
Tara,
Can I just say, though, responding directly to the question, that the way that we have developed social media and the internet, I think, is a wonderful thing. It's sort of a democracy of sorts. But the negative side is that life has been reduced to sound bites. It's been reduced to 140 characters. I'm part of that because I'm on Twitter, yes. But unfortunately, we're making more narrow all the time. The arguments, they're getting smaller, they're getting shorter. And because women do still, statistically, have a smaller slice of the pie in terms of their voice, the moment Germaine says something, she represents all women. She represents something biological about the entire sex, as opposed to being a comment from one woman. We would never say that Alan Jones represents all men, would we? We
Very
would never
topical
say,
today.
We would never say that Kyle Sandilands represents all men. We would never say that these extreme voices, these outrageous comments, represent all of one gender, and yet we do it all the time with women. And I think that's hugely unfair. And as we continue down this path of using very sensationalist headlines to get web clicks, like the Samantha Brick thing, it was constructed so that they could get lots of web clicks, and they got their wish. They got a lot of comment. I think we need to, as a people, as consumers of the media, we need to move away from this and resist the urge to get sucked into these ridiculous arguments where all context is taken away from the comment and we're focused completely on 140 characters or less.
Okay. Question over here.
Thanks to the discussion so far. It's been really interesting. I'm actually sort of really interested just to hear the feminist sort of perspective, but I was just wondering your own perspectives about the decisions to publish photographs of the Duchess of Cambridge were made by sort of female editors in women's magazines.
Do you think female editors were responsible for that?
They were in some cases.
Yeah, they were in some cases, I think.
Yeah, but exactly, they were in some cases, but this is the focus that somehow...
I mean, why would we assume that female editors who got there because they were prepared to be part of the system would necessarily do it any better than male editors? I think we've got to actually assume that women who make it up to the top make it there because they're not going to threaten the system. They're not going to sit there saying, oh, I don't think we should publish that because I'm a girl and I'll get blamed for it. You know, I just think we've got to accept the fact that the structures of the media, the structures of the power structures, the structures of politics are such that when we get women into those positions, they will behave like surrogate men. It was the point I was trying to make before about the fact that, you know, if you make it through the system these days, it is very hard. This is the idea of the parvenu. You're not allowed to be a pushy feminist in senior positions. Otherwise, you very rapidly find yourself out of them.
Dannielle, do you want to comment on that or not?
No, I agree.
Okay,
Yeah, absolutely.
Up here, yes.
I'd like to pledge my gratitude to Eva and Germaine, firstly, for mentoring my generation, which are the postmenopausal women. Thank you. Thank you. And in comment to the fat ass comments of Germaine's, I'm always recommending to my patients, I'm a health practitioner, to put on 5 kilos at the menopause and you won't need HRT. And you'll have healthy bones. But my question is, I work in the health industry in corporate health, and I'm constantly perturbed at the post-traumatic stress disorder I have to manage in women who are bullied by other women. I am very concerned that most of the bullies in the corporate world these days seem to be women. Do you have some comments? Anyone on the panel?
Germaine?
I think it relates partly to what I was saying, that women take delegation as a personal responsibility and they get very nervous about it and they take blame if it fails. And so they can easily be accused of riding someone whom they've put in a position for which that person is possibly not entirely qualified. There's also the difficult relationship between younger and older women. And I don't need to go into detail about it, but you only have to think about your relationship with your own mother to realize what a fraught area that is, because we really don't have a language or a ritual or any of the normal techniques for avoiding abrasion. And we know that lots of older women feel abandoned, feel excluded, know their voice is the last voice anyone wants to hear on the phone. And so you will get barbs and you will get destructive comments and you can take them to heart and so on. But it may be that the women are complaining about being bullied by other women because it hurts more. because it will be done in this niggly, daily way, whereas a man is more likely to do something to you that's just devastating.
But I mean, in terms of the way that you're all talking about this, and I am going to keep coming back to the topic because that's why we're here.
That's why you think we're here.
That's why I think we're here. But what I'm interested in is you're all talking about external factors all the time. I mean, at what point do women themselves have to step up and be the one who says, I won't publish those photos, or be the one that says...
I think one of the things, I don't think we are only talking about external factors. On the bullying stuff, I think it's really interesting. I agree with Germaine sometimes that it is with women being over-anxious about what they're doing and therefore maybe being too pushy. It's also the point I made earlier about people expect women to be much nicer. I mean, I've had women, people I've worked underneath me saying things like, I thought you'd be sympathetic, after they've told me a whole long sad story. And I've said, yeah, but we've got a deadline on Monday. And they say, how dare you suggest that there's a deadline on Monday when I've just told you the story? And so, I mean, there's different sets of expectations about women bosses, which I think sometimes, and some women are going to be bullies. Some women are going to be thugs. Some women are going to be awful. I mean, an ex-boss of mine once said to me, so when I complained about a woman who I thought was behaving badly, he said, you've got to realise, Eva, that equality means you get as many female fuckwits in top position as men fuckwits in top position. So I think we're taking the blame, but I think we're trying to make sure that the blame is fairly allocated and not unfairly allocated, and that's why we're pushing against the topic, which is unfair.
Yeah, okay.
We have to be realistic. I think we have a double standard when it comes to female aggression and male aggression. We have a double standard when it comes to female competitiveness and male competitiveness. The stats I reeled off earlier clearly shows that there's a lot of harm being done by males against each other and against women. And we somehow forget this because when a woman isn't nice, as you said, isn't agreeable, isn't passive or even quiet, we tend to criticize them, I think, in a disproportionate manner, in a way that is not fair.
But you've got a questioner basically saying she's seeing evidence of this kind of bullying, and it's disturbing her that she's seeing it, that it's not just about the unfairness of the kind of social construct. It's actually about the behaviour. She's saying she's worried about the behaviour. I mean,
of course there's going to be female bullies. Why wouldn't there be?
Yeah, Dannielle, what's your feeling about this, about bullying and about that kind of aggressive behaviour from women?
Yeah, look, I absolutely agree with the panellists. Of course, there will be bad behaviour amongst girls. As I said before, I think we're more hyper-aware of that. We're more alert to looking for signs of that. And I think also it does hurt more because females do feel very connected and intimate and expect almost, have perhaps an unusual and artificial expectation that another female will perhaps take them under their wing, or that there is this sisterhood. There may be, there may not be. And I think it can be a feeling of real betrayal, and we tend to then think the sisterhood has betrayed us. I mean, there isn't this sense of brotherhood necessarily, is there?
But the brotherhood betraying the brotherhood when the equivalent happens.
I don't think a man would find if another man in the workplace bullied him, he wouldn't think, well, the brotherhood's let me down.
It's incredible to me that we have this saying. It's incredible that we have this saying that all women hate each other. And we're talking about teens in a lot of cases here. When young men in Australia between the ages of 15 and 24 are more than 2 times more likely to be murdered than women in the same age group, and their killers are men. All men hate each other would be a pretty obvious overgeneralization to make, and yet we don't make that generalization.
I didn't choose the topic, by the way. Can I just please make that very clear here? Yes.
Hi. My question is for Dannielle.
Sorry, mic 3, please, over here.
My question is for Dannielle. Dealing with teenagers, girls, and the anorexic issue, but for some reason nobody talks about the new trend. It's more women after menopause are getting anorexic. I mean, centers in America are filling up with women after menopause severely anorexic. It's a taboo.
I think as a culture we've become incredibly disordered in terms of our eating generally. There is this fear of fat, this obesity crisis that's meant to be, killing our kids. So with all good intentions, sometimes parents in particular then become overcautious, and we really have started to judge a person based on their size on the scales. And this rhetoric about size being worth and our bodies only being valuable if they fit a particular ideal is absolutely devastating the adolescent population. And it's no wonder that it is also then impacting on older women as well, because, you know, when teenage girls say to me, there's so much pressure on us to fit a particular ideal, I say, absolutely, and there's certainly pressure on older women as well. We're invisible in the media. So this isn't just a generational issue.
Okay, over here, yes. I'll come to you in a moment. Sorry, I just spotted you up there.
One thing I've noticed, which the panel just touched on, is that men can hate other men without being accused of letting the brotherhood down. But if a woman is to hate even just one other woman, she's either accused of letting the sisterhood down or she's called a bitch. And I think that the reason for that is because there is still a really problematic assumption that women are supposed to be nice, we're supposed to be nurturing, and we're supposed to be kind to each other. So I just wanted to say that as a feminist, there are plenty of women who I hate. I can produce a list. I don't hate them though because they're women. I hate them because, as Eva's word, because they're fuckwits. Just as I hate men who are fuckwits. And I think it's okay to say this and to realise that that's not actually betraying anything, that that's just being upfront about the fact that there are different types of people in this world.
Okay, do you have a question?
Oh, sorry.
No, you don't have to have a question.
No, that was more of a statement, but yeah, I thought you actually just covered that before I asked the question.
Okay, all right. Okay, thanks. Up here, yes.
Is the mic working?
Can we have that mic on, please, up here?
Number one. In regard to the article by Samantha Brick, I think the issue is more...
Can you speak into the mic?
I think the issue is more that she was overconfident. So do you think we are intimidated by confident women?
Yes. I think there's a real difficulty because a lot of women are unconfident. I mean, one of the stories I often tell is in a conference, I'm one of these motor mouths that gets up and says something fairly fast. And women come up to me afterwards and say, I really admired what you said. And I said, well, why didn't you support me? I'm not like you. I can't stand up in public. So there's a sort of resentment about the women that can at the same time with their things. So the idea that a confident woman is obviously somebody who isn't aware of their faults, who is therefore to be criticised. And I think we've got to be very careful about that because I think that we often make a virtue, and back to the point that was made here, you know, of being nice. And, you know, niceness doesn't necessarily go with confidence in that particular sense, that you're supposed to be withdrawn, you're supposed to be well-mannered, you're supposed to be all of those things. And confidence is often a thing for being a bit brash, being a bit pushy. And I want to get a T-shirt printed saying nice women aren't going to change the world, so don't do it. In the sense, I don't mind people being nice, but let's not criticise women who are not nice because they're the ones that are going to make the changes in many cases.
Okay, over here, yes.
Earlier, the panel spoke about competition of sexuality in a male-dominant corporation. I was thinking, as a 17-year-old girl at a co-ed school, I've never actually found burgeoning sexuality as something oppressive, but actually in a co-ed school something quite empowering in terms of males in the society. So I was wondering, if you look at female figures and their discourse of power, such as Queen Elizabeth and Cleopatra, is Elizabeth using the sacrifice of her sexuality and Cleopatra using it as a tool? Do we think that maybe female sexuality in a male-dominated corporate world, do you think that this could maybe be a tool of manipulation rather than an invitation of oppression?
Whoa, okay. Germaine.
I would suggest that it's a pretty bad idea because I think you'd terrify the silverbacks if you actually did come on like a desirous female. You're supposed to look delectable. You're not supposed to look horny. That would not be a good idea. And looking delectable means you're expecting to be eaten. I mean, one of the interesting things about the context that we're talking in is that everybody watches The Apprentice. Don't they realise they're watching bullying on an extraordinary scale? Efficient, nasty, fatal, and they can't get enough of it. So it's hardly down to, you know, female peculiarity or women in the boardroom. It is systematic. It is part of the corporate structure, and it's one of the things we've got to get rid of.
Tara,
using sexuality in the boardroom, look, I think that this is how we like to portray women in film, isn't it? You know, women are either the nurturing and passive mother figures, or they're the succubus, the temptress, the evil woman, the bad girl, the femme fatale. I mean, I love these figures, but they are archetypes. They're not reflections of reality. We like to focus on that, but again, it's a fiction. This is a fiction about women that we have, and it goes right back to biblical days and beyond. So the idea of the woman who is the temptress is very much ingrained in our culture, and I think we need to throw these fictions away.
Up here, yes.
Hi. My question dovetails very nicely with that, thank you, Tara. I want to talk about cinema. I think that cinema is arguably the most powerful form we have in terms of exploring gender ideas and about being human in general. I was absolutely horrified to hear from Julie Rigg on Radio National about a year ago, fresh back from the Cannes Festival, that the statistics are that I think it's something like 97% of directors of films are men. What can we do about that?
Actually, the stat is 93%. 93% of working directors are male. At the Cannes Film Festival recently, the films that were up for the top nod, none of them were directed by women. And of course, it took 82 years for a woman to win an Oscar for Best Director. I think behind the scenes, it's nearly 1 to 5 is the ratio of how many men outnumber women behind the scenes. And on camera, it's about 3 to 1. In terms of male characters that are dominant. As a result of this, and there's something wonderful called the Bechdel test that some of you might be aware of, which was created by Alison Bechdel, the illustrator and comic artist, and she came up with this very simple test. It's if a film passes the Bechdel test, if you have 2 female characters who speak to each other at some point in the film about anything other than a man. Really simple. You'd think that the vast majority of films would pass this test. Unfortunately, not so. If you look at the recent Oscars, only 2 out of the 9 pictures that were up for Best Picture that year actually clearly passed the Bechdel test. And the result of this is we don't see women interact with one another. Women do not interact with one another on film because they are not the main players for the most part. And when they are, even look at, say, Lara Croft, you say, there's an empowering female. She doesn't speak to any other females in the film at all. So this is what we learn. These are the messages that we're taking in. And you're right, it does, I think, affect people. And there have been studies to prove that that's the case. It has a demonstrable effect in terms of people's perceptions. If we never see women talk to each other, and we only ever see them in this competitive position, as in the Samantha Brick view of the world, then we absorb that. There was a study that came out in 2008 on that very subject, and in teen movies, they tended to have female characters that were much more socially aggressive than males, which doesn't represent reality. And the more teens were exposed to these films, the more they believed it, and the more critical they were of their friends and their friends' friendships.
Can I raise a statistic I actually picked up, I think it was last year, that with the, the short films, the Tropfest, under the age of 15, which was Tropfest Junior, half the directors were female. In the adult area, 10% of them were female. Something happens about risk-taking, and I'd like to leave people with this idea. We did a study actually a while ago about directors' things there. Women end up being producers. It's the housekeeping role. Yeah. They actually make sure all of the money's there and the food's there and the dresses are there and everything else. Because we get back into supportive roles. We've got to work out how we get women to do the risk-taking, because that's what a director's role is. It's the creative and it's the risk-taker. You don't want the women to be the script editors, you want them to write the scripts. You don't want them to be the producers, you want them to be the directors. And that means the women have to stick their necks out and run the risk of failing, and that's something we really do need to think about because we're not very good at it.
And we need to
okay.
And we need to be willing to take risks on women as well. That's the other thing. The unique thing about film is it takes a lot of money to get a film up. If you look at the books that are published around the world, about 50% of the books that are written are by women. But we focus very much in terms of literary awards and reviews on the books written by men. When it comes to film, women who are directors or writers need the support of other people to make those projects happen. We can support them. let's focus on the talents of women so that we can try to get this gender diversity a little bit more balanced.
Okay, now that we've roundly trashed the topic, ladies, we have run out of time. I just want a final comment from each of you around the idea of room for improvement with the way that women treat one another. Where is there room for improvement? Dannielle?
I would say there's certainly room for improvement in the way we demonise teen girls and we shine an inordinate spotlight on any of the mistakes they make. They are adolescents, they are meant to be making mistakes, it's how they learn. We are really unforgiving and we often tend to police and patronise them rather than educate and give them the tools to deconstruct culture so they can make sense of it and reinvent it.
So what are you teaching them about the way they treat one another or should treat one another?
There are social skills that we all need to have. I mean, it's like Maslow's hierarchy. If you don't know how to resolve conflict, then it's very difficult for you to focus on trigonometry. See, I don't know my maths, obviously, I can't even pronounce it. So it is important to give them skills, but to understand also that making mistakes is part of that process and not to shine this ridiculous light on it and stereotype them all as mean girl caricatures.
Okay, quick comment from each of you to wrap up. Yeah, Eva.
I think one of the points I just was trying to make is, I mean, as long as women feel themselves as being powerless, you have the possibility of the lateral violence coming out of some of that powerlessness. I think it's time we actually need to reinvent the women's movement, start moving forward because we're currently stuck, and then worry about whether or not we're having a go at each other, because it's our lack of power that means we sometimes do have goes at each other.
Okay, Tara?
I think as a way forward, we can start to, first of all, accept the position that we're in, that we don't have as big a voice at the moment, and that it is possible to change that. So in other words, be a discerning consumer of media, be a discerning human being, and say, hey, if I'm always getting these messages from one gender, let's seek out and find out, who else has a story to tell. Because there are great writers out there, there are great directors that happen to be women and have a different story. So I say, let's seek them out and encourage that.
And a final comment from you, Germaine, on the topic?
Same thing, really. Just remember that women are our team and we have to wear their colours, we have to support them, we have to turn out for them, we have to be there.
All right. Could you please thank our panel? Germaine Greer, thank you very much. Tara Moss, Eva Cox, and Dannielle Miller. Thank you all very much.